The evening Clara was born, my father appeared at my bedroom door to tell me I'd be spending the night at Tara's. I've been vaguely aware of small disruptions within the household, commotions of the magnitude of lost keys, say, or of a pet having an accident on the rug. Minor calamities with which I didn't want to become involved. Clara, as it happened, was 3 weeks early and the sudden labor pains caught my parents by surprise. I was reading on my bed. My father seemed frantic in the way that parents do when they don't want to alarm a child but can't help themselves. He pulled clothes from bureau drawers and stuffed them into a paper bag. I went in my pajamas, my jacket wrapped around me. I said goodbye to my mother, but she had left us already, focused intently on the earthquake inside her. I wanted a hug or a kiss, and I might have gotten one had I persisted, but my father, anxious to complete his errand and return to his wife, tugged at my sleeve. Normally a relaxed driver, my father gripped the wheel. He answered my questions with the clipped sentences of someone whose attention is elsewhere. It was only a mile from my house to Tara's, but the ride seemed to take forever. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Is Mom going to die?" "No, everything's fine, just fine." When we arrived at Tara's, Mrs. Rice's exaggerated welcome worried me even more. "If there's anything we can do," she called to my father's rapidly retreating back. I stood at the window and watched my father jog to his sub. He peeled away from the curb like a teenager on a tear. Was the baby going to die? Tara stood beside me as I whimpered, and she bit her fingernails to the quick. "Now, now," Mrs. Rice said before suggesting the American cure for all potential disasters. "Do you want something to eat?" Within the hour I'd forgotten my distress. Tara and I stayed up late playing Dungeons and Dragons with her brother and then slept until 10 the next morning, Thanksgiving Day. So I was surprised to hear when I entered the kitchen that I had a new baby sister and that her name was Clara. Later I would learn the details. My sister, clamoring to get out, was born on the elevator, much to the horror of the hospital attendant, who was accompanying my mother in her wheelchair up to labor and delivery. The attendant stopped the elevator at the first available floor, shouted for help, and my sister was technically delivered by an orthopedist in shirt and tie who was waiting to go home to his family after a long shift at the hospital. Everyone was frazzled, most of all my father, who had dropped to his knees to catch his daughter before she hit the floor. My father came to fetch me to take me to the hospital. He was a different father than the one who had left me at the Rices the night before. He whistled as he drove with one finger on the wheel, and he related the story about the elevator, all the while chuckling to himself as if he'd just been told a terrific joke. He took me up to the nursery and pointed out my sister. I thought he'd made a mistake. I checked the name. No mistake. The small label above the cot read Baby Baker Dillon. Clara's head was misshapen, and her eyes were rat-like slits. Her skin was a mottled red and purple when he cried. She didn't look at all like the babies in the magazines, and when my father said to me, Isn't she beautiful? I was speechless. I was taken to visit my mother, who was loopy and bloated. She echoed my father. Did you see her? Isn't she beautiful? Which I found deeply upsetting. What was wrong with my parents? Didn't they see the same things I did? We have a Thanksgiving baby, my mother crowed. I was returned to the races, where I was to have my Thanksgiving dinner. Few events in a child's life are as subtly unsettling as a holiday dinner with a family not one's own. The food was all wrong. The rice served peas and jello salad and scalloped oysters, which I mistook for stuffing and had to spit out, and the kids' table was in the kitchen, my head level with congealing gravy in a pan on a counter. Throughout dinner I would suddenly remember, like a leftover wisp of nightmare, that I had an ugly baby sister, a throw that rattled me and made me furtive. My mother and the baby went home the next morning, and once again my father came to fetch me. I collected my clothes in the wrinkled paper bag and followed him to the car. He was white-faced, ashen from exhaustion, and he didn't whistle. Feeling gypped and betrayed, I asked no questions and stared out my window. I don't have to like this, I kept reminding myself. Once inside the house, my father tossed his keys on the kitchen counter. I set down my paper bag and let my jacket slip to the floor. I could hear my mother calling my name from her bedroom. "Go ahead," my father said, sensing my reluctance. Slowly I climbed the stairs. I hesitated at the bedroom door. My mother looked soft and lumpy in a silk kimono my father had given her. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had short red socks on. "Come in," she said, waving me toward her. "Come sit with us on the bed." I climbed onto the high white bed and knelt in front of my mother. She was holding Clara, who was sleeping. Already my sister had lost the mottled coloring of a day earlier. She made teeny kissing motions with her mouth, a delicate and pouty bow. "You want to hold her?" my mother asked. I did not want to hold her, just as I would not, years later, want to sit behind the wheel of a car for the first time or traverse a glacier clipped to a guide wire. I was afraid. I didn't know what to do. I thought that I might smother Clara or break her. At the very least, I'd make a fool of myself, but my mother persisted, gently encouraging me. "Go on," she whispered, as if my holding the baby were a secret just between us. "You can do it." I turned and braced my back against the headboard. My mother slid the baby carefully into my arms. Clara was wrapped like a papoose, and I was instantly amazed by her weight and her warmth. She didn't look like a rat anymore, more like a pig. She opened one eye, looked me straight in the face, and then closed it. I laughed. I was sure that she was saying, "Hey sis, catch you later when I can see and talk." My father stepped into the room. He held the camera up and took a picture. For all the time that we lived in New York, the framed photograph sat atop the mantelpiece in the living room. When we moved to New Hampshire, I insisted that my father unpack it and put it on a shelf in the den. In the photograph I looked giddy, as if I'd just been tickled from inside with a feather. I dress as if preparing for a mission in Alaska. I lend Charlotte mittens and a scarf and a better hat, all the while expecting my father to appear, bark at us, and send more to my room. There isn't much I can do about Charlotte's leather boots. She wears a size 9, I'm a size 6.5, my father wears a 12. I'll be fine, she says. I don't care about the boots. Once outside, I give her a crash course in snowshoeing. There's not much to it, I say. You strap them on and start walking, like this. I add, demonstrating. I know how to do this, she says. Charlotte climbs up onto the snowbank and moves as if her legs are blocks of wood she needs to haul around. I tell her to relax, all the while casting quick glances toward the barn. I think I hear the sound of a saw, or at least I hope I do. We might make it to the edge of the woods without his noticing us. I can't even remember a time when I've had to sneak away from my house. For the last 2.5 years, there hasn't been anywhere to go. Charlotte is panting by the time we reach a spot where we can stop to catch our breath. She bends over and puts her hands on her knees, a runner after a marathon. I ask her half a dozen times if she's okay, and finally she tells me to quiet it. She is fine. I know that if my father catches us, actually I already know that it is when, not if, my most flagrant transgression will not be having taken Charlotte to see the place where her baby was left to die, but rather that I risk her life in getting her there. I'm trusting in Charlotte, a person I hardly know, to warn me if she's in serious trouble. "You're sure you can do this?" I ask. I'm positive. The snow, dislodged from pine box above, falls in delicate showers. Charlotte begins to sweat. She unwinds the scarf and unzips her jacket to her stomach. Her jeans are wet to her knees, and I don't want to think about her leather boots. I feel each foot fall as a step toward disaster, but pride or inevitability of simply forward momentum keeps me going. After a time I stop thinking about disaster and my father and Charlotte and begin to concentrate on navigating. I can see the path clearly in my mind's eye. Finding it from the forest floor is another matter. I recognize a rocky outcropping and locate the place where my father and I were tried, but after that I move more by instinct than by certain knowledge. Were we climbing as we moved sideways around the mountain to the right? I try to remember and wish I'd paid more attention during our second hike to the spot the day we ran into Detective Warren. Charlotte and I fall into a routine. I walk 100 feet, turn to see that she's behind me, and wait for her to catch up. She doesn't look quite as ungainly as she did when we set out, and she's making better progress. As I wait for her, visions of catastrophe begin to crowd the edges of my thoughts, but I push them away. Jeopardizing Charlotte's health will not be the worst crime my father will accuse me of, I now realize. The worst crime will be getting lost and forcing others to come find us, if they can find us. Walk until we come to a clearing I have never seen before. I try to convince myself that my father and I simply bypassed it during our earlier treks, but I know that isn't so. I hate telling Charlotte I've taken a wrong turn almost as much as admitting it to myself, but I have no choice. Charlotte, too winded, says nothing. We'll find it, I say. We retrace our steps, easy to follow in the pristine snow. Tiny V's of bear tracks made faint impressions on the surface, and occasionally I can see the small scuff marks of an animal on the run. The challenge, I know, is to find the place where I went wrong. I walk slowly, like a hunter, examining every tree, every lower branch for some sign of breakage, but the bushes my father and I might have disturbed and mostly covered with snow. It is as if Charlotte and I are floating atop the forest floor. I've already admitted defeat to myself, if not to Charlotte, when I see, in the distance, the tiniest blot of raspberry. Wait here, I say. I move as quickly as I am able. When I come within 30 feet of the reddish color, I see that it's the item I hoped it was, my hat, the one I lost on the first night. It's caught within a tangle of brush, possibly blown there by the winds of the night before. It might not mark the trail precisely, but I know that the path can't be too far away. I yell for Charlotte to join me. I reach for my hat in the brush. I'm glad to have it back. I hate losing anything I've knit. My hat, I say to Charlotte when she reaches me. The path has to be near here. The trail my father and I made twice coming and going has created a faint depression, as if a brook were running beneath the snow. I motion to Charlotte to follow me. I keep to the muffled trail. We hike for another 15 minutes until I see, in the distance, a telltale sliver of orange tape. I wait for Charlotte to catch up. That's it, I say, pointing. Charlotte stands a minute, trying to slow her breathing. I wait to see what she will do. My job is done. I'm simply the guide. I have no place here except to show her the way home. Charlotte moves forward and I follow, our position now reversed. A wind bends the tops of the pines, sending snow dust to the ground. Charlotte slips under the orange tape. The footprints with their outlines of red paint have been erased. The amount of snow might be a bed for a burrowing animal. I refuse to think about how a baby might have lain here covered, as if with a heaping pile of quilts. Charlotte walks to the center and kneels. She has on the purple and white striped hat I gave her. She's taken off the mittens already. Kneeling in the snow in snowshoes is always awkward at best. They bend her feet and dig it at the small of her back. She scoops up snow and brings it to her face. She covers her mouth and nose and eyes. She holds it there for what seems like minutes. It begins to melt from the wall of her face and dribbles off her chin. She is crying, her shoulders shaking. She makes a quick feline movement and lies over the snow, her face buried. I stand outside the enclosure. When she has not moved in some time, I say her name. Charlotte. She snaps back up onto her knees and begins to cuff the snow, first with the right hand and then with her left. Right, left, right, left, right, left. Angry sweeps, accompanied by words I can't at first make out. I think she's simply groaning or crying, but then I hear the word stupid, and after that, the words could I. She bends forward and slaps, and the snow is in a frenzy. I hear her say, God, God, God. I did not imagine this. I pictured a quiet scene, satisfying and healing. Not this fury, not this hurtling grief. Charlotte turns and sits on the snow, her legs to one side, her hands braced behind her. Her face is crimson and wet. I wait, feeling as helpless as I ever have. God, she says, not to me and not to any god she might or might not believe in. She lifts her face to the sky. She leans forward and crosses her arms over her chest. She bends her head, as if closing in on herself. She remains that way for 5, maybe 10 minutes without moving. "Charlotte?" I ask. She glances up and seems surprised to see me there. She pushes her hair off her face. "I think we'd better go back," I say. With difficulty she stands. She stumbles on the snowshoes. She leaves the enclosure, slipping under the tape. I see that she has left the purple and white hat behind, but I don't want to ask her to go back for it. "You walk in front this time," I say. "The tracks will be easy to follow. I'll let you know if you go wrong." Her face is scratched and chapped. The bruise on her chin from when she hit the corner of the table is turning yellow and green. She looks as though she's been beaten up. I slip back to get the hat and stuff it into my pocket. I watch the back of her blue parka as I follow her. She wipes her nose on her sleeve, which can't be much help. I think about her scratched face and worry that she might have given herself frostbite when she pat her face in the snow. Charlotte moves slowly, and it's hard not to step on her snowshoes. I don't want to lead, however, because I'm afraid she might simply lie down or wander off. I wonder at her rage and grief. Was it rage at herself or at the man who left the baby there? Not a man, a boy, a college boy, a student like herself. She is only 19. Is a 19-year-old a girl or a woman? I wonder, a boy or a man? At the place where I took the wrong turn, I call ahead to her and tell her which is the correct path. She's an automaton on bamboo, proceeding forward because there isn't any other alternative. If she stops, she'll lie down and curl up in the snow, and I'll never get her to stand up. She stumbles once and puts her hands out to stop her fall. She scrapes her palms on the rough bark of a pine tree. "Put your mittens on," I say. After we pass the halfway point, I realize that I'm hungry. I haven't had anything to eat since breakfast, and I hardly ate that. I fish in my pockets for a piece of gum or a crumpled cracker in cellophane, left over from a school lunch. Charlotte stops in front of me, and I tread on the backs of her snowshoes. "What?" I ask. When she says nothing, I peer around her. In the distance I can see a moving bake shape. "Crap," I say. I walk forward to meet my father, because I know he'll be even angrier if he's forced to make his way to us. We meet on the path in our snowshoes. His fury is tight and monumental. "What in God's name are you up to?" he asked through his nearly frozen mouth. "I was just... Do you have any idea what you've done?" he asked, interrupting me. "She might have fainted again. You might have gotten lost. You both might have died." I hardly recognized my father's contorted face. He points in the direction from which he came. "I want you in that house just as fast as your legs can get you there," he says. He looks around me at Charlotte, and as for you, he begins. But the ruin of Charlotte's face silences him. The scratches are more prominent now, and her eyes are swollen. "What happened?" he asks. Neither Charlotte nor I answer him. I can't think how I'd even begin to describe what took place within the orange cycle. I know, as one does at 12 or 11 or 10, that I have witnessed something I shouldn't have witnessed, seen something I shouldn't have seen. I know already that I will not be able to erase the image of Charlotte coughing the snow in a frenzy. I walk through the trees, knowing that my father will have to wait for Charlotte. I don't want to be told to go to my room. I'll go there of my own accord and climb into bed and pull the covers over my head. With any luck, I'll fall asleep and wake up with no memory of the last hour. The path is easy to follow. 3 people in their snowshoes have trampled it. My father, in his anger, has made the deepest cuts of all. Snow begins to fall before I reach the house. I've always been amazed by the onset of a snowfall. First, a few tiny flakes dot the air, so that I'm not sure if it's actually snowing or the wind is blowing it off the tree branches. Then there is a gentle and pervasive fall that resembles the snow of movies or of Christmas cards. Before I've walked 15 minutes away from Charlotte and my father, I feel as though I'm caught in a blizzard. I think of waiting on the path in case the snow covers the tracks before my father and Charlotte reach the point where I'm standing. But then I reason that my father will surely know the way. I don't want to think of their silent trek, Charlotte walking ahead, my father taking up the rear, 2 strangers in the woods. At the house, I unbuckle my snowshoes, go inside, find a package of ring dings in a cupboard in the kitchen, and hurry up to my room. I let my wet and soggy clothes slide to the floor until I have on only my underwear. Looking into the mirror over the desk, I see that my face is chapped red and my hair is stringy. I walk to the bed, sit at its edge, and stuff the ring dings into my mouth. Still shaving, I lie down and pull the covers up to my chin. The world beyond my window is opaque. I hear a door open and close and the stamping of boots against the mud in the back hallway. The door opens and closes a second time, another stamping of boots. There's no exchange of words, merely a stocking-footed tread on the stairs. I hear the creak of the guest room door, then a second tread on the stairs, this one heavier than the first. My father's bedroom door swishes closed. I lie in my bed and listen, but there is only silence. I awake to a knock on the door. It seems colder in my bedroom than it ought to be. I prop myself up on my elbows. I notice that it's dark outside. "Mickey," my father says. "Just a minute." I toss the covers aside, snatch my bathrobe from the back of the door, and pat it on. I tie the sash and open the door. My father stands in a darkened hallway. He has a flashlight pointed toward the floor, and I can just make out his face. "We've lost the power," he says. "What time is it?" "7. Get dressed and come down to the den, and wake her up and get her down too." My father still won't say her name, and Nikki. "What?" "Don't you ever, and I mean ever, pull a stunt like that again." I concentrate on the spot of light on the floor. "Another half hour and I wouldn't have been able to find you," he says. The fury is gone from his voice, but the parental scold is not. "I'm sorry," I say. "I should hope so," my father says in the dark. I have to shake Charlotte's shoulder to wake her. She sleeps with her face smashed against the pillow, her mouth slightly parted. I wonder, just before I touch her, what she dreams of. of her boyfriend, whose name is James, of baby Doris before she was baby Doris? Or are her dreams more specific and more terrifying, of a baby hidden beneath a mound of snow? The power is out. I tell her when she sits up. We have to go down to the den. There's a fireplace there. She seems disoriented. What? She asks. Dress warm, I say. What time is it? 7. You've got a flashlight here on this table. Use it, especially on these stairs. There's a fire in the fireplace when I arrive in the den. A half-dozen candles have been lit and set on a side table and the coffee table. I know from prior experience to our dress. I have on 2 sweaters, long underwear under my jeans, and 2 pairs of socks. I can hear my father in the kitchen. I go to the window and peer out at the snow. The storm has stopped and the cloud cover is breaking up. To the west are stars and the moon. I love the look of moonlight on the snow, the liquid blue of a molded landscape. Beside the sofa are 2 rolled sleeping bags. Normally this would be for my father and me, who would sleep close to the fire during the night, but I guess that now they will be for me and Charlotte. My father, I know, will not sleep in the same room as Charlotte. My father enters the den. She's coming down? He asks. Yep. That sweater there, that's for her. A heavy grey sweater has been folded and set atop the armrest of the sofa. What are you making? I ask. Scrambled eggs and bacon. My father will be able to stay warm in the kitchen by lighting the gas stove. That's probably where he'll sleep, I now realize. I kneel in front of the fire, feeding it bits of kindling. There are 2 scorch marks in the wood floor where sparks landed when a log toppled. The inside of the fireplace is black with chimney soot. Charlotte appears in the doorway. She has her pink sweater pulled tight across her chest. Her hair is freshly brushed and her skin is rosy in the firelight. My dad's making dinner, I say. Are you hungry? Yes, me too. I'm starving. Charlotte sits on the sofa with her arms crossed in front of her. What happened on the walk back? I ask. Did my dad say anything? No, she says. Not a word? Nothing. Wow, I say my generic response to all statements. My hand brushes the hem of her jeans. They're wet, I say. Just damp. You'll freeze. I'm all right. Wait here. I climb the stairs to my father's room. I search for a pile of clean laundry, distinguished from the dirty laundry on the floor only by the fact that the clean clothes are folded. My father's pants will swim on Charlotte. I can't. Charlotte says when she sees what I've brought her. You can, I say evenly. I'm not my father's daughter for nothing. Pass this on. There's a bird here, and that sweater there is for you. It'll be warmer than your sweater. Charlotte hesitates, then stands. She takes the clothes and walks toward the front room. Hang your jeans to dry, I call, on a door or something. I set the trays and pour the milk, opening and shutting the fridge as if a wild animal were inside and wanted to escape. My father serves up the scrambled eggs. I'm salivating from the pungent smell of the bacon. I balance 2 trays in my hands and find Charlotte sitting on the sofa in what is rapidly becoming her spot. She has rolled the cuffs of the jeans and has my father's sweater on over her own pink sweater. She looks as though she were playing him at a Halloween party. I say a tray in front of her. She examines it but makes no move to pick up a fork. My father enters with his tray and the lantern, clearly taken aback to see Charlotte in his clothes. In the lantern light, the windows are black and reflective. I can see my face distorted in the old glass. Charlotte leaves her fork and takes a restrained bite. I know she must be as hungry as I am, but her gestures are stiff and formal. I'm less restrained, and were it not for the power outage, or my father's painfully rigid silence, he almost certainly would tell me not to shovel my food. What makes a family? I wonder. My father and I are technically a family, but it's a word neither one of us would ever use. Yes, we are father and daughter, but because we were once members of a family that was torn apart, we think of ourselves now as half a family or a shadow family. As we sit there with our trays on our laps, however, I feel, or perhaps only imagine, a family consisting of my father, Charlotte, and me. I imagine it because I want it. I want an older sister who will not be a replacement for my mother or Clara, but instead something in between. Someone who will tell me how to wear my hair or what to say to a boy who might know how to dress. My father, Charlotte, and I do not have blood in common, but we are united by a person whose presence hovers in that room, who might be lying in the center of that room on warm, soft cushions. This is good, Charlotte says. My father shrugs. The telephone rings, a harsh and foreign sound. I always forget that when the power is out, the telephone still works. For a moment, none of us moves. I think about Detective Warren. I jumped up. I'll get it, I say. I'm relieved when I hear Joe's voice at the other end. Hi, I say. What are you doing? Joe asks. Eating. I'm so bored. I glance over into the den. Jo wouldn't be so bored if she knew that the mother of the abandoned baby was sitting across from my father. The storm is a drag, Jo says. Yeah. We were going to the movies before this. With who? My cousins. You still coming skiing? Yep, I say. So what did you do all day? I took the mother of the abandoned baby into the woods and watched her go nuts. Nothing, I say. Wrapped a few presents. Me too. I kind of have to go, I say. Call me later? Sure, Joe says. I hang up the telephone. I stand a minute in the kitchen. I eat another piece of bacon. When I return to the den, Charlotte has finished her dinner and sits primly as if waiting for instructions. My father finishes his meal. Charlotte stands and removes my father's tray from his hands and slips it under her own. I watch her walk out to the kitchen. What did Joe want? My father asks. Nothing, I say. I don't know why you do that. Do what? My father asks, though he knows perfectly well what I mean. Not talk to Charlotte. I don't get it. Is it going to kill you to talk to her? I hardly know her, my father says. She doesn't want to live here, I say. She keeps saying she wants to leave. And as soon as we get plowed out, she will. My father says, standing, this isn't a social occasion. What would you know about social occasions? I snap. When I reach the kitchen, Charlotte is scraping the plates. I set the lantern on the stove. Charlotte's hair is burnished gold in the light. Do you play chess? I ask. Not really, she says. You feel like toasting marshmallows? In the fire? Yes. Not really, but you have some, she says. I remember how sick I felt yesterday. I can hear my father shouting outside. But if you have another game or something, I'll play it with you, she adds. What did you used to do at night? I ask, when you lived with James. As soon as I ask the question, I'm embarrassed. Probably they had sex all night. He'd get home from practice late. We'd eat. We might listen to music for a while. Then he'd study. I might read or watch TV. Sometimes I'd knit. You knit? I ask, surprised. She nods. I knit all the time, I say, barely able to contain my excitement. That hat you wore today, the purple and white one, I knit that like a year ago. Cool, she says. I never meet anyone who knits, except old ladies. Byron down at the store knits. Who taught you? My mother. My grandmother taught me, Charlotte says. She taught me to knit and to paint and to sew. She used to insist that I speak only French to her. Not your mother, I ask. My mother's always worked at the mill. Charlotte puts all the dirty dishes in the sink. She whips off the trays and sets them onto the top of the bridge. In the summer, James and I would sit in the backyard. The landlord let me have a garden. I had some vegetables, but mostly flowers. My father has set the stove to 200 degrees, which is enough to warm the kitchen, but there are no chairs in the room on which to sit. I return to the den just as my father is bringing in a load of wood. He sets it by the fire without a word and goes outside again. After a time, Charlotte joins me by the fire. What year are you in school? I ask. Sophomore, she says. You won't go back? I ask. No, she says. Not there anyway. Because he might be there? He plays hockey. He's on a scholarship for it. She pauses. He wants to go to medical school. Wow, I say, picking at the rag. It's why I couldn't tell anyone, she says. Didn't anyone notice? I wore loose sweatshirts and sweatpants, she says. I had one seminar course which I dropped. The rest were lecture courses in auditoriums. Eventually I dropped those too. But didn't your friends or roommate say anything? I spent all my time at James' apartment. I hardly ever saw my roommate. Maybe she thought I was putting on weight, I don't know. I gained weight all over. You probably wouldn't think it to look at me, but I'm supposed to be skinny. I cannot imagine it. Charlotte looks perfect as she is. People probably would have begun to notice except that the baby came early, she says. A month, I think. You don't know? I ask. Not really. Your family didn't know about the baby? My parents would have killed me. They're strict Catholics. And my brothers, I can't even think what my brothers would have done. She shakes her head once quickly. I know this is kind of hard to understand, she says, looking straight at me, but I kind of gave myself over to him, to James. You did? And Nicky? Yes? I wanted the baby. I really wanted it. What's it feel like? I ask. She tilts her head and studies me. You don't have anyone to talk to about this, do you? No. You can't ask your father. No. A friend? She asks. I think about Jo, the Viking goddess. I don't think she knows any more than I do, I say. Charlotte brings her knees to her chest and wraps her arms around them. The position masks her, though, because she immediately sets her legs to one side. It's unlike anything you can ever imagine, she says. The world outside our house is silent. No humming of motors, no groans from the furnace, only the fire snaps. Occasionally, through the windows, I can hear the scrape of a shovel against the snow. You know that something is, I won't say wrong, but different, she says. Right away, food doesn't taste right. She touches her throat. There's a kind of metallic taste right here. Foods you used to like a lot smell bad, and your breasts hurt. They get swollen and tender, and then you realize you didn't get your period when you were supposed to. So I bought a test in a drugstore, and there it was, big as life, the pink dot nut. I'm pretty sure I know what the pink dot nut means. I waited another couple of weeks before I told James, but then I wasn't feeling well. I was queasy, not just in the mornings either. It's sort of a headachy, sick to your stomach feeling. So then you told him? I asked. I did, she says. And what did he say? She was shocked at first and kept asking how this could have happened. We had always been pretty careful. She glances at me to see whether or not I know what being careful means. I nod, though I'm a little fuzzy on the details. He pays it a lot, she says. Sometimes he'd say, "What are we going to do?" And then he'd ask me how I was. He wasn't happy about it. I think he could see his whole life draining away. I hate James even more than I did before. But what about your life? I ask. Did he care about that? He cared, she says. Of course he cared. He didn't ask me to get rid of the baby. He's Catholic too, and I think he knew enough not to ask me to do that. But he did talk about giving the baby up when it was born. He just kept saying, "We'll take this one step at a time." She stops for a moment and arches back. I have the feeling that it's hurting her. The morning sickness goes away, and it just feels, so wonderful I can't explain it. You feel the baby kick, she says. It's an inside tickle like gas bubbles moving around. But different. Everything is different from anything you've ever felt before. And you feel full, just full, she smiles. Even though you're always angry, I craved dot nuts most of all. Nothing on them, just the plain but hot with a crispy outside. I ate them with milk. Charlotte stretches her legs in front of her and leans back, propping herself up with her elbows. She yawns. "It'll be different for you," she says, looking at me. "It will be wonderful and perfect, and it won't have a bad ending. I'm sure of that." Charlotte yawns again. "Thank you for taking me to the place," she says. "I'm sorry it got you in trouble with your dad." "That's okay," I say. "He'll get over it." I sit to one side of the fire, poking it from time to time to make the flames burn brighter. I pat on another log. I remember that I still need to finish my grandmother's necklace. I reach for the flashlight and stand. I have to go up to my room. I tell Charlotte and get my beads. Charlotte yawns again. The fire is making me sleepy. I could find my way without a flashlight, but I use it anyway. I locate the shoebox of beads and rawhide and bring it down to the den. I set it near the hearth so that I can distinguish the beads in the firelight. I rummage around in the box to find a crimp. "That's beautiful," Charlotte says. "It's for my grandmother." The necklace has 6 round black canyon beads with a silver pendant in the center. I swear that, Charlotte says. You must have a very cool grandmother. Charlotte watches me fuss with the crimp, always the hardest part of making a necklace. I have to fit this rawhide into this little thingy here, I say, and then clamp it down so the rawhide won't come out. This makes the catch. Oh, she says. I slide the end of the fine rawhide into the crimp. I use the crimper to flatten it. When I'm done, I pull on the rawhide to make sure the crimp worked. The rawhide springs free. Crap, I say. I search through the beds in my box for another crimp. I might have one in my desk drawer upstairs, but I don't want to have to go all the way up there again. The beads in the box flicker and catch the firelight. I have glass pony beads and crow beads, seed beads and barley silver beads. What's this one? Charlotte asked, holding a blue glass bead up to the light. It's Czechoslovakian. It's a fire-polished bead. What does that mean? I don't know. It's beautiful, she says. You should see it in the daylight. Do you want it? Oh no, she says, dropping the bead into the box. I take it out again. I have 6 of them, I say. You could make a necklace, too. But they're your beads, Charlotte says. I have a lot of beads, I say. Charlotte looks at me and tilts her head the way she often does. Thanks, she says. I hand her a coil of rawhide. I search the box for the remaining 5 blue glass beads. The color is hard to detect in the dark, but the beads have a distinctive shape, round and multifaceted. Charlotte sets the beads on the floor and then begins to string them. I pick up my grandmother's necklace and hold it up to the firelight. There's a sheen on the beads, and the pendant is perfectly centered. I glance over at Charlotte. She has strung the beads on the rawhide. Wait a sec, I say. I should have told you. If you do it like that, the beads will slide around and the clasps will end up in the front. What you have to do is put a knot on either side of each bead. Because you have 6 beads, you have to put your first knot in the exact center of the string. I reach over to show her. I make a simple overhand knot. Okay, she says. I hand her the rawhide. I watch as she slides a bead on. Her delicate fingers make an easy knot, nicely placed. Her hair hangs down around her face, and she has to flip it to one side so that she can see in the firelight. I watch as she strings another bead and then begins on the opposite side. It's a simple necklace to make. They're all simple, really, but it's her first, and spacing the knots on the opposite side to match the first side is sometimes a little tricky. For a while I simply observe. Charlotte's face is tight with concentration. She must look like this when she's studying, I think. When she has strung the last bead, she holds the necklace up to the light. The facet sparkle. Looks great, I say. Charlotte lays the necklace against the small triangle of skin inside the collar of her white shirt and my father's V-neck sweater. You'll love it in the morning, I add. Earlier, when I was rummaging through the box for the 6 blue beads, I felt a second crimp under my fingers. I think I've got one in here somewhere, I say, holding the box up and typing it toward the light. I sift through the beads. A bit of silver catches the light. So here's the hard part, I say. The telephone rings. Again, it seems wrong in the cozy firelight, as if something from one century had crept into another. I glance over at the kitchen. Joe again, I say, standing. I'll be right back. I walk into the kitchen and pick up the phone. Hi, I say. Nikki? I spin around my back to the den. This is Detective Warren. Is your dad there? I hear the rhythmic scrape of the shower outside. I take a quick breath. No, I say. He's in the shower. I can hear Charlotte behind me in the doorway. Tell him to call me when he gets out, okay? Warren asks. Sure. Let me give you the number. Detective Warren gives me a phone number which I don't write down. Your power out? He asks. Yes. Here, too. Stay warm. We will, I say. I hang up the phone. I turn and look at Charlotte. Oh, God, I say. What? Charlotte asks. It was that detective. Charlotte's face is expressionless. What did he want? He wanted my dad. I feel breathless with my crime. I said he was in the shower. I go in the morning, Charlotte says. You can't keep this up. I think about how my father drove to the police station in back of the post office. How he intended to tell Chief Boyd. If Chief Boyd had been there, Charlotte would be in jail now. Charlotte turns and walks into the den. I follow her. She stands a minute by the fire. Maybe I should go to the bed, she says. I'm not sleepy in the slightest. She scans the room. We're supposed to sleep here? I roll out the two sleeping bags. I put her closest to the fire because that's the best spot. I think about everything Charlotte told me. How could a man really love a woman and expect her to give her up her baby once it was born? The idea of giving up a baby, never mind leaving it to die, is incomprehensible to me. I can't imagine it. Wouldn't it just hurt your whole life, just like losing Clara always hurts me even if I don't think about it every second? It's why I've had to create the idea of Clara still growing, still alive. It's where I send my thoughts whenever I start to think about her. Charlotte climbs into her bag and adjusts her pillow. I sit to one side of the fire, poking it from time to time to make the flames burn brighter. I put on another log. I'm still not sleepy. Charlotte falls asleep at once. I listen as she begins to snore lightly. I work on Charlotte's necklace until I finish it. I set it in the box. In the morning, I insist she put it on. I climb into my sleeping bag and stare at the ceiling. I think about morning sickness and the pink dot knot. I wonder about the metallic taste at the back of the throat. I glance over at Charlotte and realize once again that she is the mother of a baby that was left to die. She is sleeping in our house on the floor right next to me. She might get caught and go to jail. My father and I might go to jail. I roll over and watch the fire. I might have to lie awake for hours I decide. I might have to go find my book and read it with the flashlight. But after a time I begin to picture a different future. One in which Charlotte doesn't get caught, one in which she gets her baby back, one in which she and her baby live with my father and me. I see this future in great detail. A white crib in the guest room, in the den an old high chair with a red leather seat that I once saw at Switzer's. A blue stroller in the back hallway, in Charlotte's car, a padded baby seat. I'll go to school during the day, and when I get home Charlotte will be pacing the back hallway with the baby on her hip. She'll have on her fuzzy pink sweater and a pair of jeans. She'll have chocolate chip brownies waiting for me, and she'll ask me questions about my boyfriend. She'll have an errand to do, or maybe she'll go to school in the evenings and she'll ask me to babysit. At night, while we do our homework together, we'll have to talk quietly so we won't wake the baby up. Charlotte will take me to Hanover to get my hair frosted, and she'll drive me and my friends to the movies. There will be no James. My father will come around. I'll make Charlotte an ankle bracelet, and I'll knit a blanket for the baby out of the pastel multicolor yarn that Marion is always trying to palm off on me and I never take. No, I'll make it out of the soft yellow yarn I once saw at Ames in Newport. Charlotte will take me to the store and I'll buy the yarn with my own money. I'm thinking about a basket weave pattern when the warmth of the fire begins to work on me as it must have done on Charlotte. The last sound I hear is that of my father stamping the snow from his boots in the back hallway. I wake once during the night. There's a disturbance, but I'm so tired from the shoveling and the hiking and the nervous atmosphere in the house since Charlotte's arrival that I go back to sleep almost immediately. I wake again, however, just a short time later, to the sound of voices from the kitchen. I don't want the voices to be there, I want to slip back into my dream, but the fact of the voices makes me open my eyes. Voices? There are murmurs, long strings of syllables, clapping answers, but I can't actually hear the words. The firehead has mostly gone out and only a few embers glow. Charlotte, I see, is not in her sleeping bag. Later I will learn that Charlotte, waking during the night and wanting a glass of milk, and not knowing that my father would be sleeping in the kitchen, tripped over the sleeping bag with my father in it and smashed her palms hard into the grillwork on the stove. My father woke and examined Charlotte's hands. He lit the kerosene lantern and made 2 ice packs with plastic bags. He told Charlotte to sit on the sleeping bag and lean her back against the cabinet and let the ice do its work on her bruised palms. I squiggled out of the sleeping bag and walked down the hallway. I see Charlotte cradling the ice packs in her palms. My father is standing in the opposite corner, not far from her because the kitchen is so small. He has his back against the counters where they meet at a right angle. I can see them because of the light from the kerosene lantern, but the hallway is dark and they haven't yet seen me. I'm about to step into the kitchen when I hear Charlotte say, "You shouldn't blame Nikki for what happened today." I stop. "It was all my idea," Charlotte adds. I backed her. "She should have known better," my father says. "You both should have known better." I turn away from the kitchen and pat my back to the wall. "It was awful," Charlotte says. "I imagine it was," my father says. I'm not sure what surprises me more, that my father and Charlotte are in the kitchen together all day, that they're actually talking. "How are the hands?" I hear my father ask. "A little numb," she says. "Keep the eyes on them. I should have told Nikki I was sleeping here before you both went to bed." "I didn't see you." I slide down the wall and sit on the floor. I draw my knees up to my chin. "You warm enough?" my father asks. "I'm all right," Charlotte says. I imagine Charlotte with her head tilted back against the cabinets, possibly with her eyes closed. "You'll be going tomorrow," my father says after a time. "The plow should get here in the afternoon." There is a long silence in the kitchen. It was never our plan to abandon the baby. Charlotte says, I want you to know that. My father says nothing. James just kept saying, "We'll take it one step at a time." That's what he'd say whenever I'd mention the future. I thought he would know what to do when the time came. He'd work in a hospital for a semester, and he was going to medical school. I hear the clink of ice cubes in a plastic bag. I'm breathing so shallowly I have to take a gulp of air. "I suppose you thought you loved him," my father says. "I did love him," she says. "You're how old?" my father asks. 19. Old enough to think for yourself. Didn't it even occur to you that you might be endangering the life of the child by not telling anyone beforehand? "You mean like a doctor," Charlotte says. "Yes, a doctor." "I thought about it," Charlotte says. "I went to the library and read about pregnancy and birth. I was sick during the early part of the summer. Morning sickness, except that it lasted all day. I was worried about that, but if I went to a doctor, I was afraid either my parents would find out or the school would." "There are clinics," my father says. "It's cold in the hallway, and I don't have the sleeping bag." I draw myself together in a ball. "I work as a temp with an insurance agency," Charlotte says. "I moved from office to office, subbing for people who went on vacation. I was living with James by then. My parents thought I was sharing an apartment with another girl. Once they came to visit, we had to put all of James' stuff in his car for the weekend. My father found an issue of Sports Illustrated in the bathroom, and I had to go on this riff about how I'd just become a baseball fan." Charlotte pauses. "In the fall," she continues, "I pretty much stopped going to my classes. I took long walks and I learned to cook a couple of things." "You were playing house," my father says dismissively. "I suppose. Where do your parents live?" Charlotte doesn't answer. "I'm not going to call them if that's what you've worried about," my father says. "No, it's just that I'm not going to call in the police either," he adds. "If I were going to do that, I'd have done it already. That's a decision you're going to have to make." In the hallway I begin to shiver from the cold. I want to blow on my hands, but I don't dare for fear of giving myself away. My father will be furious if he finds out I am listening. "They live in Rutland," Charlotte says. "Vermont?" "Yes, they work in a paper mill," Charlotte says. "They got laid off. Now my mother works at a drugstore, but my father's still unemployed." "Paying for school must have been a struggle," he says. "One of my brothers was helping, and I had loans, though I probably don't anymore." "And the car?" "It was my brother's. His old one. He gave it to me." "Where's the school?" "UVM. You're a long way from Burlington," my father says. I know where Burlington is. I've skied Stove, which isn't far from the northern Vermont city. "When the labor started," Charlotte says, "we got in the car. James wanted to get as far away from the college as possible. And then the labor stopped for a while, so we kept going. When it started up again, we looked for signs for a motel. That was James' plan. To go to a motel and have the baby ourselves. If there was any sign of trouble, James said he'd make sure we'd be only a few minutes away from a hospital. But if we didn't have to go, why should we risk it?" My father makes a sound of disgust. And yes, Charlotte says, I guess I was playing house. I convinced myself that James and I would get married and I'd have the baby and we'd live in his apartment and he'd go to medical school and everything would be great. The fact that it was secret just made it seem all the more romantic. I imagine my father shaking his head, and no matter what happened afterward, Charlotte says with a quaver in her voice, or what happens from here on out. She takes a breath to collect herself. That will always be a good memory for me. The time I spent with her, with the baby, because she was inside me, and I talked to her, and I hear a rip of paper towel. I'm sorry, Charlotte says. Here, use this. I hear my father say. Charlotte blows her nose. Thank you, she says. Where is he from? From the sound of my father's voice, it seems that he's leaning against the counter again. You won't? I told you I wouldn't. His father's a doctor. They live just outside of Boston. I've never met them. He didn't want his parents to know. That's the thing he was most afraid of. How was he going to explain you and the baby? Eventually. I don't know, she says. My father clears his throat. Are you thinking about trying to get the baby back? He asks. Part of me wants to, Charlotte says. Can you take care of her? No. I don't know the law, my father says. I don't know if they would give her to you, even after whatever happens in court. When she was inside me, I wanted her so much. Charlotte says. Charlotte, my father says, his voice low. It's the first time he has used her name, and it shocks me. You have your whole life in front of you. No, don't look away. Listen to me. There will be consequences whatever you decide. Hard consequences. Things you'll have to live with her for the rest of your life. But think first. Think about the baby, about what might be best for her. Maybe you should fight for her, I can't say. Only you can answer that. You lost a baby, Charlotte says with a kind of snap. Her words send an electric thing through the air and around the corner to me. I wait for the sound of footsteps, for the sound of my father leaving the room. I'm sorry, Charlotte says at once. I shouldn't have said that. It was different, my father says. Really, I'm sorry, Charlotte says. Very, very different. I know, Charlotte says. I know. You weren't to blame. You didn't do anything. It just happened to you. You know about the accident, my father says. Yes, Nikki told me. Did she? Just the fact of it. That it happened. I hear a creak from upstairs, wood settling, my father once explained. Even after 150 years, the house was still settling into the ground, burrowing in. Maybe you should take those off now, my father says. I want to tell you what happened in the motorroom, Charlotte says. I don't want to know. Please, she says. I want you to understand. Why? I don't know. You found her. Nikki's asleep? My father asks. She was snoring when I got up. My head snaps up. I snore? James and I drove a long way. Charlotte says, I had to get out once. I couldn't hold it anymore. I couldn't even make it to the woods. I just went on the snowbank. And then there was this terrible shuddering feeling, and I saw that there was blood and other stuff on the snowbank, and I got scared, and I started yelling for James. He got out of the cart and went white when he saw the blood. I couldn't get up, the pain from the contractions was so bad, so he hauled me up and got me in the car, and we made it to the motel. In the hallway I felt my hands like two fists under my chin. My eyes are wide open, even though there's nothing to see. There were maybe 2 other cars in the lot, Charlotte says. Hardly anyone there at all. James went into the office while I stayed in the car. He told me not to yell, so I bit my hand. He came out and got me inside. I can hardly remember what the room looked like. There were these curtains. Green plate. Ugly. I've seen the room, my father says. I lay down on the bed, she says. The contractions were every minute or so. There was hardly any time in between. I was grunting. I thought because of the blood the baby would come fast, but it didn't. It felt like I was there for hours. You didn't think of getting to a hospital? My father asks. I said once, I need to get to a hospital, but the contractions were coming so fast, I thought I would deliver any minute, and I didn't want it to happen in the car. I was in so much pain I didn't know how I'd even get to the car. Charlotte pauses. I didn't know what it would be like. What was normal to feel? I was scared to death. I thought I was going to die. And what was James doing all this time? Sometimes he sat with me. I remember digging my fingernails into his arm when I was having a contraction. He paced. He'd bought some Demerol from a guy to have on hand for the pain, and he gave me 2 with a glass of water. And then when it got worse, he gave me 2 more. I didn't even care what the right dose was. I've taken 100 of them. I just wanted the pain to go away. I can hear my father saying, I started wanting to push. Charlotte says, I realized then that I couldn't get up from that bed and make it to the car. Whatever was going to happen in that motel room. And that's when James really started to fall apart. He kept yelling, What are we going to do? I don't know what to do. So I had to tell him. I had to talk him through it. I asked him if he could see the head. I made him wash his hands. I was just grunting then. I tried to breathe the way they say to in the books, but it didn't work. I wrapped my arms around my legs, and then I couldn't stop pushing, and the pain was just unbelievable, Charlotte says. I felt as though I was being torn wide open. I was sure I was going to die. I yelled, and it's amazing someone didn't hear us. In the kitchen there's a long silence. And then she was out, Charlotte says finally. The baby was born. James was crying. I told him to pick the baby up and get the mucus out, and she cried right away. She was covered with that white stuff. James thought there was something wrong with her. I told him to cut the cord. The scissors were in my bag, in a plastic bag, and he did. And then I told him to wrap her in a towel. I told him to watch for the placenta. The placenta had to come out. There was a lot of pain then, and this surprised me. I think something got torn. I was shivering, and I had a terrible headache. There's another silence. I think that's when I realized how much James didn't want the baby. Charlotte says, I really started to lose it then. I was crying. I told him to pick the baby up and hold her and to check for all her toes and fingers. He seemed calmer then. I said, "Give her to me." And he did. He just laid her across my stomach. I put my hand on her, but I was drifting by then, drifting in and out. I remember I propped myself up and looked at her. She had her face turned toward me. I had a tremendous feeling of relief. And then I lay back again, just resting for a second. And then I must have passed out. "You passed out?" my father asks. The next thing I knew was James was in my face and he was saying, "Get up. We have to get out of here. We have to get you to the car." And I said, "Where's the baby?" And he said, "She's in the car. She's sleeping in the basket we brought. But it's cold out there and we have to get going." He helped me up. I was sore and could hardly move. "Walk like there's nothing wrong," he said. He locked the door of the motel and kept the key. He put me in the passenger side. He opened the back door and bent over the basket like he was tucking the baby in, checking on her, and he said, "She's sleeping now." And I said, "I have to feed her." And he said, "When she wakes up." I remember I turned around and I saw the basket mounted up with the blankets we brought, and I thought she was in there. I had to reach around to put my hand on the blankets. James put the key in the ignition and started the car. I drifted off again. I walked once, I don't know how far we'd gone, and I said, "She's still sleeping?" And she said, "Yes." That was all, just yes. And then I fell asleep again. "You never saw her," my father says. "Just that one time when she was on my stomach," Charlotte says. "Then what happened?" my father asks, his voice steady, even a little relentless. When we pulled into the driveway of our apartment, I woke up. I said, "Get the baby. Maybe something's wrong." I don't hear her. And James said, "She woke up once. You were sleeping. She's fine." And I said, "She did?" And he said, "Let's get you in first. Then I'll get the baby." So he came around to my side and helped me out and up the steps and into the apartment. And all the time I'm saying, "I'm fine, just get the baby." He helped me get my coat off and I sat down on the sofa and he went out to get the baby, and that was that. The silence is long and I think that maybe Charlotte has finished her story. I must have drifted off again for a few minutes. Charlotte says after a time, because when I woke up, James was sitting across from me and he was crying. Charlotte's voice is so low now, I have to strain to hear her. I knew right away it was terrible. I started saying, What is it? What is it?" And James told me the baby had died. "It's not true," I said. I heard her cry. He said she was alive for a few minutes, but that she died. He said he tried to revive her. He did CPR or something, but that she was dead. He said he panicked and wrapped her up in a towel and took her out behind the motel and left her body in a sleeping bag he had in the trunk. I went crazy. I hit him in the face. I fell on the floor. She might have been alive. I kept screaming. "No, He said. She wasn't. And then what was in the basket? I yelled, and he said, nothing. And I said, why didn't you tell me? And he said, I thought you'd go crazy and I wouldn't be able to get you into the car. I wanted to get you home first. And I said, home? I'd rather be dead. In the hallway I bent my forehead to my knees. And then I realized that James was crying too, just as much as I was, and that really scared me because then I believed him. I knew it was all true, and oh God, I was so sad. I wrapped my arms around my head. It's punishment, I said to James. Charlotte continues. Punishment for what? James said. For doing it the way we did. For not telling anyone. For not going to a hospital. If we'd gone to a hospital, she'd be alive. He said we didn't know that, but I was sure of it. It just made it all so much worse. He stayed with me that night and most of the next day. But then he said he had to go home to his parents. It was Christmas break, and he'd already had to make too many excuses why he wasn't home yet. I said I'll be fine. I wanted him to go. I just wanted to be alone. James packed his duffel bag and said goodbye, and I remember that we didn't even kiss. I remember thinking, this means something. I knew he wanted to get away from me just as much as I wanted him to go. She pauses. He didn't love me, did he? No, my father says. You wouldn't do this to someone you loved, would you? No, you wouldn't. Charlotte begins to cry again. After a time I hear her blow her nose. About an hour later I walk into the bedroom to lie down, and the radio was on. I remember this surprised me. I didn't have the energy to walk around the bed and turn it off. I just climbed in and pulled the covers over my head. When the news came on, I heard something about an abandoned baby being in stable condition. I sat up. The announcer said Shepherd, New Hampshire. I hadn't known the name of the town where the motel was. I had a map of New England in my car. I went out to get it. I looked up where Shepherd was. I ran back in and got my keys and drove to the store and bought a newspaper. There was a story in it about the baby. I was just so happy she wasn't dead. Charlotte pauses, and that's when it hit me. I realized what James had done. He'd left her to die. At first I couldn't believe it. I thought myself that he just made a horrible mistake. But she wasn't really. And then slowly I realized he had to have known she was alive, and still he traipsed out into the snow and left her there. I could hardly breathe. I didn't cry. I couldn't scream. It was just nothing. He did it deliberately, my father says. He knew she was alive. Charlotte is silent. He planned it all along, my father says. I don't know, Charlotte says. Maybe he just panicked. I can't believe he drove all that way knowing he was going to kill her. Why didn't you call the police? I was afraid, Charlotte says. If I went to the police, I knew I'd be charged with attempted murder. I was scared, so I began to think, well, it's okay now, isn't it? She's alive and someone will take care of her. I couldn't take care of her. I had no money. I would have to leave James' apartment. I couldn't go home to my family with a baby. So it was all right, wasn't it? My father is silent. I called James at his home, Charlotte says. He wasn't there. His mother said he'd gone skiing with friends. Skiing? My father asks, incredulous. I was so dumbfounded I just hung up the phone. Incredible, my father says. I lay in bed for a week, Charlotte says. I hardly ate anything. I was so tired. Finally, I got up and drove myself to the library and looked up all the back issues of the newspapers until I came to the story with your name in it. She pauses. And then I drove here. Why? I had to see you. I don't understand. What was my life worth if I didn't thank you? Charlotte says. Her extraordinary question, almost more amazing than her confession, almost more astonishing than her terrible story, flows through the kitchen and out to the hallway. A pulse in my left ear begins to pound. I'd better go back to bed, Charlotte says. I can hear rustling, a soft thump against the cabinet. My leg has fallen asleep. Give it a shake. It must be hard for you to hear this, Charlotte says. It would be a hard story for anyone to listen to, my father says. Look, I'm really sorry about what I said about losing a child. That's all right, my father says. I keep thinking I could have stopped him, Charlotte says. A bomb explodes, one without sound. I bring my hand to my eyes, temporarily blinded by the light. Our house begins to hum. Oh, Charlotte says, startled. The power's back, my father announces, sounding a little stunned himself. I squint in the all-bright light. The wood floor shines, and there's a glare of the painted wall. I want to shut my eyes. The world is harsh and ugly, and I hate it. I scoot along the floor and crawl into my sleeping bag. When Charlotte enters the room, I prop myself up. What happened? I ask, squinting up at her. The power's on, she says. The palms of her hands are bright red. Her nose is pink and raw, and her voice is thick. Weird, I say. It's the middle of the night, she says. Do you want me to turn off the light so you can go back to sleep? Where were you? I got up to get some milk. What happened to your hands? I tripped over your father, she says. She turns off the light and crawls into the sleeping bag beside me. I slide back into my own bag. I press my hand against my chest to keep my heart from jumping out of my skin. I think about everything Charlotte told my father, the blood on the snow, the way Charlotte kept passing out the moment she realized James had left the baby to die. It was all too awful, too horrible. I cover my face with my hands. And then I begin to think about how my father and I drove north from New York and settled in a town called Shepherd. Charlotte and James drove south from Burlington and found a random motel in Shepherd. Our paths crossed at a single spot in the woods. But what if, I wonder, on the second day of our trip, my father and I had figured out the complicated interchange at White River Junction and gone north as we were supposed to do? What if my father had decided to make a go of it in New York after all? What if my mother had dropped a quarter at the register when she was buying a present for her parents and the mall and knelt to retrieve it, thus delaying her 2 seconds to her car? What if my father had not, as my mother had once told me, walked into the university library one spring morning to read about the Yankees-Orioles game the night before and seen my mother on the circulation desk studying for a chemistry exam while parting in her work-study hours, and ask her, on the spur of the moment, how he might get permission to look at a series of rare Jefferson drawings kept in the vault? I would not exist. My father and mother would not have married. There would have been no Clara. I want to believe that my father and I were meant to stumble across baby Doris and give her a chance at life. But now I'm not so sure. I'm thinking about accidents and intersecting footsteps as I drift off to sleep.